Hello and welcome to the Business Talk podcast. I'm your host Deepak. I'm delighted and honored to welcome Dr. Richard Straub, founder and president of the Global Peter Drucker Forum from Vienna, as our distinguished guest on today's podcast episode. After a 32-year career at IBM, where Dr. Straub held various executive positions, including those of Chief Learning Officer and Deputy General Manager for the European IBM PC business, Dr. Richard Straub jointly with his wife, Yuzi, founded the Global Peter Drucker Forum in 2009. The inaugural conference was held that year to honor Dr. Peter Drucker on what would have been his 100th birthday. The forum is now in its 16th year and has become a globally recognized platform and reference for advancing the practice of management. In 2024, Dr. Richard Straub announced a flagship initiative spanning the 5 years to the 20th forum in 2028 to reframe and renew management for the 21st century under the title The Next Management. For more information about the event, please visit the website link mentioned in the YouTube description. In this episode, Dr. Richard Straub will share profound insights from the Peter F. Drucker's life on the topic Management as a Catalyst for Societal Progress, Lessons from Peter Drucker's Legacy. So without further delay, let's welcome Dr. Richard Straub to the podcast. Dr. Richard Straub, it's an honor and privilege to have you join us today.
Thank you. It's a pleasure.
Dr. Straub, three former chairmen of NYU Stern School of Management, have assessed Peter Drucker's life and work, particularly his two productive decades at the school. Their insights are featured in the 2005 edition of the alumni magazine of NYU Stern. In the article, they mention that Drucker described himself as a journalist, writer, and teacher rather than a traditional academic scholar or researcher. He attributed this to his deep familiarity with the deadlines and pressures of journalism. Could you share your thoughts on this perspective and how it shaped Drucker's contribution to management thinking?
Thank you. Yes, Peter Drucker is certainly what you would call today an unconventional management thinker. He doesn't fit into the categories of academia where management has been in some way defined as a science, right? Almost close to be respectable in a way as a hard science. Some try to define it this way. He was never in agreement with that, and so he also he also thought that management as a very broad subject, interdisciplinary subject in some way, cannot be tackled through um, scientific, sometimes even, articles and research that is based on mathematical approaches. But I mean, we will come back to this point, but for him, it was always the human being in the center. And when it comes to the human, you cannot go far with pure mathematical calculations in terms of what the human how humans react or how humans act. So in this sense, he always defined himself as a writer. Um, I mean, not just he was also a journalist, but he was a writer, and I would say with the ability to think very deeply. And since he had this very profound education, to think in a much broader way than most people who are normally talking and writing about management. That was his strength. I mean, his weakness, if you look from the pure academic side, but it was his strength if you look at the way how his thinking has influenced management.
Peter Drucker viewed management as a social function rather than just an organizational discipline. How did he define the role of management in shaping society?
One of the distinctive features of Peter Drucker is that he doesn't come he didn't start with management thinking. He started as a social scientists, as a almost social philosopher in some way. He studied society, and he studied how societies evolved, and how how this evolution played out, and what were the important currents over the last several hundred years. And he only got into management at a later stage after he has done his first books were purely focusing on society. The End of Economic Man, for example, was focusing on the roots of totalitarianism, on the future of industrial man, another book written during the war, where there were very fundamental questions on the table, obviously. But then he came to it was his epiphany in some way. He came to the point where he said, well, uh, for societies to function, they need to have institutions that work and that function and that achieve something, that achieve results. And via this way, he came to the conclusion that management as the as the element that makes societies, that makes institution function, is ultimately a decisive role in society, not only for business. Of course, he saw it in business, because in business it's very clear. You need to achieve something. You need to create value. But it's true for other institutions as well. And so his conclusion from the very beginning was management is not only a function for business, but a function for all institutions in society.
Drucker often emphasized the idea of management as a liberal art. Could you elaborate on what he meant by this and how it applies to modern leadership?
Yeah, this ties quite well to what I mentioned before, that he didn't want to be put in a box where you say management is a pure science, right? So for him, if we look at this broader picture, management was a practice in the first place. You applied it, right? It was a practice. But he was also the one who said it's more than a practice, because we can make it a discipline, we can define it, and it can be learned, it can be studied. Then you need to make it a discipline, and you need to put some systematic approach into it. You need to look at it in a systematic and in some way logical way. So it was not like, even if he said management is not a science, he didn't mean management is, can go in all direction. But as a discipline, you can start to put it in a framework where people can do something with it in a systematic way. And that was, by the way, his biggest contribution, that he has moved management from being bits and pieces, more or less laying around in different places. Here was something about leadership. Here was something about logistics. Here was something about psychological problems of people, etc., in organization. And he put it all together. That was the key point. And in this same context, because he was so much focused on the human being in everything, he came also to the conclusion, and that was his answer to the scientific approach to management. No, management is not a science in the sense like natural sciences are, but it's a liberal art, because so many different disciplines play into it, and being psychology or philosophy. For him, it was also important to understand history when you talk about management. So this was the background, that he said the human side and the humanities behind the human sides are as important for management as some of the scientific disciplines, which you still need, because of course you need to be able to calculate. You need to be able to calculate financial data. You need to be able to make, to construct plans and to project things, etc. But this was the background.
Dr. Straub, given today's fast-paced technological and economic shift, what aspects of Drucker's management philosophy remain most relevant?
It's an interesting question because, you know, I know from his widow, Doris, when before Peter Drucker passed away, he said, and it was reported by several people, he said, in 2 years, nobody will talk about me anymore because this is all moving so fast and nobody will remember me. And I think the reality is even when you look at some of the general measurements like Ngram on Google, you can still see that Peter Drucker is by far the management thinker who is who has most citations today, right? By far, yeah, with a big distance to the next ones. So that means there must be something, yeah, that is still relevant today. I normally define it in the context when you look at management, there's always the what of management, the big theories, the big concepts. There's the how you implement it, and there's the why, which gives you the bigger picture, the meaning, which gives you the bigger context. And Peter Drucker was at his time present in all three. He wasn't just a philosopher of management. He was not somebody who only developed new management concepts and theories, but at the same time he was also very deep into the how, because he talked all the time. He wasn't a manager himself. He wasn't a manager, but he talked all the time to people who were deeply into daily management. So he really understood it because he was able to listen. So in this sense, uh, I would say there are less things in the pure how how to do things. That changes because you have new technologies, you have new models how to do things, and this changes. There is still something in the what where he's absolutely relevant because he was so early in certain. He was much ahead of his time. When he talked about decentralization, it was very early days. And still today, the big, the companies who are most progressive in their thinking, they are still struggling with it and they are trying to find more decentralized models. But the idea of decentralization was absolutely keen. Then to give you another example, it sounds trivial today, but customer focus, to have the customer in the center. Uh, it was Drucker who put this in the right spot because his most famous quote, I think it's his most famous quote, is about the purpose of a business. And what he said was the purpose of a business is to create a customer, right? He didn't say the purpose of a business is to make money, that most people would immediately say. He said is to create a customer. And so he inverted things in a clear way because he said without a customer you won't make money. So it really starts with the customer. And at the same time, he also was clear beyond doubt about his focus on the human being. And this is also something which is absolutely valid today. Um, think about Indian businessman. His name escapes me right now, but who wrote the book Employees First, Customer Second. Employees first means if I take care of the employees, they will be able to take care of the customers, right? So it's the same idea. How do you serve your customer? How do you make sure that you create value that is important in the long term? And so these are just examples, and I think we could find many of these examples where Peter Drucker had the very fundamental idea, but not only the idea, but he had the ability to express it in a way that stuck on people's mind. Because the purpose of a business is to create a customer. What is the, I mean, that really sticks. And on the other hand, you have things like sound simple but are so difficult to do, but still valid, is like everybody wants to innovate and to do new things, which is great. And he was totally behind that. But he was the one showing from the beginning, if you don't stop to do things, if you don't abandon things that shouldn't be done anymore, you will ultimately get big troubles as an organization and institution, not only in business, true for government as well.
How can organizations balance profit making with their broader responsibility to society as Drucker envisioned?
Yeah, there was a lot of confusion about this field, even in the context of stakeholder capitalism, right? I'm always shocking people when I say Peter Drucker was not a supporter of stakeholder capitalism. And I will explain what I mean. Uh, Peter Drucker was very clear, if a business goes bankrupt, it cannot be a good citizen, it cannot contribute to society. So the first responsibility of management versus the business is to ensure that the business is able and is positioned to create value in the long term, right? If you cannot create value, nothing else will work. So he was clear on that. That was one key item. At the same time, there was no doubt that there were responsibilities beyond business, or it had to happen in a framework beyond pure business results. So his he gave it as a key responsibility to management to place people where they could perform, and that's an example. It's very practical. It's not just be nice or be good. No, no, that was not the point. It was about in an organization, the key responsibility for management is to put people in spots where they can perform. And that's a big one and a very difficult one, right? So in this sense, it's also a responsibility across institutions, not only for business. So I mean, but to come back to your point about business in society, so his his approach uh, was business has to contribute substantially to society, and management is a key role in society. Management has to be seen as a role that um, enables society to function. So it's a big responsibility. And it's not just to create profits. But if you are a business, to take this type of institution, if you don't create profit, you cannot invest in the future and you will disappear. So you cannot ignore this fact. And in stakeholder capitalism, which was touted very highly in the last years, it looked like you have all these responsibilities to your various stakeholders, and I mean, ranging, of course, employees. But I just mentioned his interest in employees was immensely high. Employees and the trade unions and the The customers, of course, are part of that, and your business partners, etc. Yes, you have them all, and they are part of your environment, but you cannot put the priorities at the same level for all of them. If you do that, you have no priority. And one of the fundamental ideas of Peter Drucker that people tend to forget today is focus. If you are not focused on what your priorities are, you will get in troubles. And the recent discussion about some of the programs that were intended to support society but didn't work this way um, have exactly this issue.
Dr. Straub, in a world facing complex global challenges such as climate change, economic inequalities, and geopolitical instability, what role does effective management play in fostering resilience and progress?
Yeah, I mean, management is in the center of that. If you look at management as the function that makes institutions work, I mean, organizations are representing institutions in some way. Yeah, broader business institution, or in the public sector, wherever you look, and that means management are the he called it uh, an elite group, right, in some way, uh, on which the not only the functioning, but he says even the survival of society depends, right? So management plays a key role in all this, and because we have the discussion today in, when you look in politics, for example, um, politicians seem to work according to other rules. But when you understand some of the issues of our time, you will quickly find out that even political leaders, who are unfortunately currently driven by very short-term objectives. This was also one of the big criticisms of Peter Drucker of our current system, that is much too much driven by short-term considerations. But the politicians have a management responsibility. They should achieve results. They should achieve outcomes. In many cases, they don't. And this is where the democratic system comes to its limit today, as we can see.
In 1981, Harvard Business Review invited Peter Drucker to share his perspective in the article Behind Japan's Success. Drucker was deeply influenced by Japanese business practices, art, and culture, and he played a pivotal role in shaping Japan's post-war economic resurgence. He was among the select Western thinkers who helped inspire Japan's management philosophy, drawing valuable lessons from his history, traditions, and organizational discipline. What inspired Drucker to study Japanese management, and how did his observations shape the broader management era?
Yes, I mean, Japan plays a very strong role in Drucker's life and in his work. Yeah, there's no doubt. And the story is like he was invited the first time as a speaker to come to Japan and to have a presentation. And I think it was in 1959. In 1959, so still relatively shortly after the war, Japan was in a completely different situation at the time. And uh, he made connections there. And uh, based on this initial visit and the follow-on, he said he became addicted to Japan. And the Japanese saw in him very quick somebody who could help them to sort of change their model. Because, from the war, the Japanese came out as a former military power and as a very autocratic state. And now they moved into a completely new democratic capitalist model. And so Drucker was one of the few non-Japanese who were involved to help them in this transition. And it happened so that Drucker, when he said he became addicted, he also had a great interest in Japanese art. And when I visited his widow, Doris, after we had started the Drucker Forum in Claremont, she showed me the Japanese painting he had collected. He had a huge collection of valuable Japanese paintings. So it was very deep in him. And it went so far that he even lectured Japanese art at Claremont Graduate College, at Pomona College. So he went even deeper, and during 2 years, I think, he was lecturing Japanese art.
Drucker believed that knowledge workers would define the future. How do you see this evolving in the age of AI and automation?
Yeah, I think the first point I would make is that uh, Drucker was the one who defined knowledge workers and knowledge work. He was the one who came up first with it he started in the 50s, but really in the 60s, he was honing in on this subject, knowledge work. And one of the interesting elements he defined where he said this is different from work which was traditionally top-down, imposed work where somebody told you what to do in some way, right? Knowledge work, he said immediately, no, the knowledge worker knows more about the subject than the boss, right? And so the question becomes, is a different one. Not to tell the knowledge worker what to do, but to enable him, to give him the freedom or her the freedom to do the work and to sort of let things evolve more bottom up than top down, right? And so this was the starting point. And already during Drucker's life, the computer came up as a key element, and he always considered the computer as a moron, as he called it. He said the computer cannot do anything unless you tell it to him. Now, times are changing, and with artificial intelligence, of course, we have computing power that has a different, a different capacity and can really go into areas like knowledge work. And so the question becomes, is the knowledge worker obsolete? And this must be seen under Drucker's headline, where he defined in the year 2000, when I think it was his last book, Management Challenges for the 21st Century, he said, the biggest challenge for management of the 21st century is the productivity of knowledge work, right? And of knowledge workers. And it may be that we could argue that artificial intelligence makes this difference and will make this difference in knowledge work. The knowledge worker by no means will be obsolete in most areas where it's really knowledge work, especially in the more complex areas, because the knowledge worker will be fed by information and by conclusions in some way from systems, but which the knowledge worker needs to validate, needs to combine in new ways, needs to ask back. Asking questions is, of course, essential. So I think the knowledge work moves to a new level because the basic things like data collection and finding sources, etc., this was not the most attractive part of knowledge work. This is moving to this is more or less automated. But the true knowledge work, that means giving sense and meaning to things or seeing things based on being inspired by information, finding new ideas based on this information. That is something that is not going away by no means.
Drucker was known for encouraging executives to ask the right questions rather than seeking the perfect answers. What are some fundamental questions today's leaders should be asking?
Yeah, Drucker had the famous questions. He went to this. There's a book, The Five Most Important Questions Everybody You Should Ask in a Business, and it starts with mission, but it goes also, who are my customers and how do I create value to my customers? So questions, I think his fundamental thinking is if somebody gives you immediately the answer, it is most probably wrong. The question requires a sound thinking process. If you ask the right questions, you have done some significant homework. And I think that's still relevant. And today, uh, I mean, we are back to asking questions, by the way. That's interesting because one of the skills with ChatGPT is the prompting. And prompting is asking good questions and continuing with questions and getting gradually to the right answers. So I think it's still absolutely necessary and maybe even more important and more clear than in the past.
Dr. Straub, what lessons can policymakers and corporate leaders take from Drucker's work to drive inclusive economic and social progress?
Yeah, I mean, Peter Drucker has written a lot about society. And when we talk about the economic and social process, we talk about society in some way. And he had even this notion of entrepreneurial society, which he covered in his book, Innovation and Entrepreneurship, already in 1985. And uh, he was very influenced by Schumpeter, by the thinking of renewing society, renewing the economy, but also in some way society by this you know, he Schumpeter called it creative destruction. Destruction doesn't sound good. So for Clay Christensen had later a different terminology when it comes to disruptive, right? Disruptive innovation. So this of course plays a key role in moving society forward. And Drucker thought that management, as it operates in institutions, has a key role uh, to to help with the self-renewal of society. So good management renews institutions, and good institutions can help to self-renew society. If it doesn't happen, if you know, if institutions become ossified and don't operate in the right way and are dysfunctional, then you can end up in revolutions, and that's the worst place to be.
If Drucker were alive today, how do you think he would advise leaders navigating the complexities of the 21st century?
Uh, if he would be alive today, uh, you mean how he would? I didn't understand the second part of the question. Can you just
Yeah,
repeat it?
yeah, how he would advise leaders
Yeah,
navigating the complexities of 21st
yeah,
century.
yes. Uh, I mean, the complexity is true that since Peter Drucker lived, the unpredictability and complexity has increased. On the one hand, due to technology, the interconnections between a globalized society are quite challenging. But as we can see, it's not just technology, it's also human beings. It makes a difference who is leading in which country. And things can dramatically change almost overnight, right? And uh, Peter Drucker had no recipe in a way for managing complexity, uh, but he was already on subjects like you know, mm, being able to understand weak signals, to look out of the window, to see what's happening, and not only getting carried away with the mainstream opinion. So that means he was always advising organizations that they need to be open, to be open to the external, to what's happening in the external world, and to adjust. So these subjects that we discussed today were very familiar to him. And so the other point he always made is, don't believe you know it all. It was his point about humbleness. Because the first thing you need, if you are a manager, if you think you have all the components and you completely control the situation, you may be very wrong. And the more complex the situation gets, the more this is true. So he also helped to get the right mindset in order to cope with complexity.
What role do forums like Global Peter Drucker Forum play in keeping Drucker's ideas alive and adapting them for future challenges?
We've got a clear mission by Peter Drucker's widow, by Doris. I mean, when we ran the first forum in 2009, Peter Drucker had already passed away. I never had the honor and the pleasure to meet him because at the time when I was an executive at IBM, I didn't think he was so approachable. As later I learned that it would have been, you could almost call him, right? He was approachable. But this wasn't happening. But his wife, Doris, when they gave us, if you will, the mission uh, and asked us to run the Global Peter Drucker Forum, uh, after having been in Vienna for the first centennial, for the 100 years Peter Drucker Forum, because in 2009 we started. That would have been, as you said in the opening, his 100th birthday. And she when she saw it in how we did it in Vienna, she said, "Okay, look, uh, uh, you we will stop all the other Drucker forums in other places. If you run it in Vienna, we make it the global Peter Drucker Forum." And at the same time, she told us, but don't make it a museum. It should never be a place where you just repeat everything that Peter Drucker said. Your responsibility is to in some way stand on his shoulders and to understand what does it mean for the future. And as I said in the beginning, not everything that Peter Drucker said is valid today. And he would be the first one to admit to that. He was saying that, right? So our responsibility is to understand what what is still relevant today, how can we help today, and to use his approach. And his approach we use in what we call the next management, because we are saying there's so much happening in management, and there is new currents here and there. There's design thinking, and there's lean startup, and there are zero budgeting, and what have you, many different things. In the next management, we take the Drucker approach, saying we are not just looking at the individual things, but we are looking at the total framework. What is the broader framework for the future for management? What are the guiding principles that have evolved during the last decade or decades? And this is where we believe the Drucker Forum has importance and responsibility, because the world is in troubles to some degree, because institutions are so dysfunctional, and we don't achieve what we should achieve, and we waste enormous amounts of human ingenuity, creativity. That means we don't let it come to the surface. That's still one of the biggest problems. The biggest resource we have on Earth is human creativity and ingenuity, but it's suppressed in most organizations. Organizations are not able to bring it to the surface. And in this sense, we see ourselves very much as one of the centers of gravity to help move the world forward. And one of our big ambitions in this context is to reposition management again for the young generation. Because the young generation thought management is just for making profit. It's not good. It's not for the environment, etc. No, management is for moving the world forward. And if it's rightly understood, that means making the world or making society more effective and efficient, and at the same time more humane. Then you can say management is a noble profession. And this is where we want to move things.
Dr. Straub, my last question. What is the most overlooked but critical lesson from Drucker's legacy that you believe leaders should reflect on today?
Yes, so some of them I mentioned, and but I think the most overlooked lesson is this idea that management, leadership, of course, is part of management in Drucker's ideas, is a societal responsibility. It's not just about managing business. And in the next management, in this initiative that I just mentioned, this is one of the areas where we put significant focus on. Because it cannot be that we are wasting billions in a time where the world is by far not yet working as well as it should for very badly managed initiatives and projects. So there is a big responsibility to understand that you need in positions of power and influence, you need people who are managers and leaders in the Druckerian sense. And here we come back to the notion of liberal art. They need to be more than technocrats or specialists. The key point about management as a liberal art is that you may be very deep in one subject, but at the same time, you need to have the breadth of education across disciplines, and you can never. I mean, if the world should survive, you need philosophers, you need psychologists, you need people, anthropologists, and not only specialists on artificial intelligence and on information technology, etc., and on pure management for efficiency. So you need this type of human being, and I think that was a message from Drucker, which must be understood again.
Dr. Richard Straub, it has been an absolute privilege to have you on this episode. Your insights into Peter Drucker's legacy and the role of management as a force for societal progress have been truly thought-provoking. Drucker's principles continue to guide leaders in navigating uncertainty, fostering innovation, and creating a positive impact beyond the walls of their organizations. Thank you for sharing your expertise and reflections with us today. I'm sure our listeners will take away valuable lessons on how management, when practiced with purpose and responsibility, can be a true catalyst for progress. We look forward to continuing this important conversation and learning more from the work of the Global Peter Drucker Forum in the future. Once again, thank you, Dr. Richard Straub, for joining us.
Thank you.